My house was destroyed by a fire, so I went to my son's place. He said, "We can't handle this right now, Mom. Claire and I are stretched too thin." That night, I made a phone call I never thought I'd make, to my first love, Robert. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My name is Evelyn Parker, and at 68 years old, I believed I had survived enough storms in life to handle anything. I had buried my husband Harold 8 years ago. I had seen friends pass on, neighbors move away, and my only son Daniel drift further from me each year. But nothing prepared me for the Thursday evening when my home, the place Harold and I built together, was reduced to ash. It started in the kitchen. A faint smell of burning wires, so out of place, pricked my senses as I stirred pasta. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor burning leaves. But then I saw smoke curling from the living room. By the time I rushed in, orange tongues of fire were already climbing the curtains. My breath caught in my chest. The electrical socket near Harold's old record player glowed with blue sparks. Within minutes, the flames spread to the wooden beams Harold had polished by hand when we bought the house in 1981. I froze. Then instinct kicked in. Grabbing the small suitcase from under my bed, I stuffed in my mother's locket, our wedding photograph, and a few family papers. 40 years of memories, and I could only hold on to what fit in my shaking hands. The heat grew unbearable. Windows cracked, and glass shattered as smoke filled the hallways. Coughing, I stumbled out the back door, still wearing Harold's wool sweater, though the night was warm. I watched as my world burned, the sound of wood collapsing echoing like gunshots in the air. Neighbors gathered, some shouting for hoses, others calling 911. Sirens wailed in the distance, but I already knew the truth. My home was gone. That night, I sat on the curb, watching firemen spray jets of water on the skeleton of my house. Every crackling beam that fell felt like a piece of my life breaking away. A Red Cross volunteer pressed a blanket over my shoulders, her voice soft but professional. "We have shelters set up at the community center. You'll be safe there, safe but not whole." The thought of lying on a cot in a gymnasium filled with strangers made my chest tighten. My house was gone, my independence stripped away in one night of fire and fury. When dawn broke, all that remained was blackened rubble. The rose bushes I'd tended for 20 years were charred stumps. Harold's workbench collapsed into twisted metal. The smell of smoke clung to everything, including me. By morning, the insurance adjuster arrived. A young man, barely 30, with a clipboard and polite detachment. He looked over the ruins, shaking his head. "Total loss," he muttered. His words fell like stones. "How much?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Well, your policy was for $140,000. With depreciation and deductions, you might see $100,000. Maybe less. $100,000 to rebuild 4 decades of life. It might as well have been $10. I borrowed a phone from my neighbor, Mrs. Bradley, whose own house had only suffered smoke damage. My hands trembled as I dialed Daniel's number. I rarely called, birthdays, Christmas, and the occasional check-in. But now, he was my only hope. "Mom?" His voice sounded surprised, then cautious. "Daniel, it's me. There's been a fire. The house is gone." A pause that stretched far too long. "Are you okay?" "Yes, but I have nowhere to stay. Just for a little while, until I figure things out." Another pause, quieter this time. "Of course, Mom. Come here. We'll work it out." Relief flooded me. My son wouldn't let me face this alone. Mrs. Bradley helped me pack what little I had salvaged into her old car. 3 garbage bags of clothes reeking of smoke, a suitcase of photographs and papers, and Harold's scorched toolbox that had miraculously survived. That was all I had left. The drive to Daniel's neighborhood felt surreal. We passed the diner. Harold and I used to visit every Sunday, the grocery store where I'd bought countless bags of flour and milk. They were still standing, untouched, while my home was ash. When I entered Daniel's subdivision, the contrast nearly broke me. Perfectly trimmed lawns, cars gleaming in driveways, homes with fresh paint and polished shutters. Life went on, untouched by my disaster. Daniel's house stood at the end of the street, a 2-story colonial with pale gray siding and a red door. A door chosen, I knew, by his girlfriend, Claire. I had only met her 3 times, each encounter leaving me feeling like an unwanted guest in my own son's life. Daniel opened the door before I could knock. For a brief moment, seeing his familiar face, My eyes, Harold's jawline, made me think everything would be okay. "Mom," he said, stepping aside. But his tone carried something else. Unease. Behind him, Claire appeared, her blonde hair tied in a neat bun, her clothes crisp and immaculate. She smiled politely, but her eyes flicked to my garbage bags as if measuring the weight of the disruption I carried. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, "we're so sorry about the fire." I set my bags down, embarrassed by the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes. "It's just temporary," I said quickly, "until the insurance comes through. I'll help with cooking, cleaning. I won't be any trouble." Daniel and Claire exchanged a look, silent words passing between them. It was a look I had once shared with Harold countless times, but now it excluded me entirely. "Let's sit down," Daniel said, guiding me into their pristine living room. White couches, glass tables, rugs so clean I hesitated to place my shoes on them. It felt less like a home and more like a magazine spread. I perched on the edge of the sofa, clutching Harold's sweater around me. "What's the plan, Mom?" Daniel asked from across the room. Not beside me. Across, like a manager interviewing an employee. "The adjuster said it'll be a few weeks, maybe a month, before I see any money. I was hoping to stay here until then, just until I find an apartment." The silence stretched for too long. Claire shifted, placing a hand on Daniel's arm. "Evelyn," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "Our lives are complicated right now. Work is stressful, and money is tighter than it looks. Having someone else here, especially long-term, it would throw things off balance." I blinked, not understanding. "I'd stay out of the way. I'd even contribute with whatever little I have until the insurance comes." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about that, Mom. It's about space. We've built a rhythm here, and we don't want to disrupt it." I felt my chest tighten, as though the fire had followed me here. "I'm your mother," I whispered. Claire gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you are, and that's why we think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Maybe an extended stay motel? We could help with a little money to get you started." A few $100s. That's what my place in my son's life was worth. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me. To remember every fever I sat up with him through, every extra shift I worked to buy his college textbooks, every night I comforted him when his marriage collapsed. But he nodded. "Claire's right, Mom. You need your independence." The words struck like embers against my heart, burning deeper than the fire that destroyed my house. I left their home carrying my 3 bags and Harold's toolbox. Daniel stood by the door, shifting uneasily, while Claire offered another polite smile. "Don't be like this," Daniel said. "We're just doing what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone," I repeated, "would have been to let your mother sleep in her son's house." They said nothing. I walked out, my knees weak but my voice steady. "Don't bother calling me, Daniel. I wouldn't want to disturb your rhythm." The night swallowed me as I sat in my borrowed car. Through their spotless windows, I saw them talking, probably deciding how difficult I had been. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had always prided myself on being independent, strong, and able to endure. But independence is a luxury you can only afford when you still have choices. Now I had none. For 3 nights, I drifted between parking lots, the car my only shelter. Gas station bathrooms became my washrooms. Mirrors I avoided because I couldn't stand to see the reflection of a woman discarded. Each night, I clutched Harold's sweater tighter, as though fabric alone could keep me from unraveling. And each night, I thought of a small piece of paper I had carried in my wallet for nearly 50 years. A business card, yellowed with age, belonging to the boy I once loved. On the 4th night of sleeping in my car, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. My back ached from curling into the seat, my legs cramped, and the air smelled of smoke and stale upholstery. I dug through my purse, desperate for some anchor, and there it was. A faded business card, edges frayed, ink smudged with time. I had been 17 when he pressed it into my hand at the county fair, his dark hair falling over storm-gray eyes. "Call me anytime," he'd said with a smile that made me believe forever was possible. I had never called. Life had carried us in different directions. He left for college in California, promising to return. I stayed, married Harold, and built a life of stability. But something about Robert, the boy who dreamed big, remained lodged in my heart like an unfinished sentence. And now, nearly 50 years later, I sat in a Walmart parking lot with 3 garbage bags and a burned-out life, wondering if I had the right to dial that number. It was probably disconnected, or worse, it would be answered by a secretary, polite but distant, telling me Robert had moved on decades ago. But I had nothing left to lose. My hands shook as I pressed each number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked. "This is Robert." The voice was deeper, steady, touched by years. But it was him. I knew it instantly. I almost hung up. Instead, I whispered, "Robert, it's Evelyn. Evelyn Parker. You might remember me as Evelyn Sanders back in high school." Silence stretched long enough to make me think the call had dropped. Then he said my name again, softly. "Evelyn." Tears welled up. "I'm sorry to call you like this. I know it's been decades, but I didn't know who else. Where are you?" His tone sharpened with concern. "I'm in Tulsa. Well, in a parking lot outside a McDonald's, if I'm honest. My house burned down last week. My son, he and his girlfriend don't want me staying with them. My voice broke. I didn't know who else to call." "Stay where you are," Robert said, firm. I heard the slam of a car door through the line, an engine roaring to life. "Text me the address. I'm on my way. You don't have to." "I do. Evelyn, I've been waiting 50 years for this call." 2 hours crawled by as I sat in that lot, my hands tight around Harold's old sweater. Doubts flooded me. What if he had changed beyond recognition? What if he pitied me? What if this reunion only deepened the ache of loss? But beneath the doubts flickered something else. Something I hadn't felt since before the fire sirens. Hope. At 11:40, headlights swept across the lot. A sleek silver Lexus slowed, searching. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The door opened, and a man stepped out. His hair, once dark, was now silver, his shoulders broader, his face lined by time. But when his eyes found mine, storm gray and piercing as ever, the years collapsed. It was Robert. He walked toward my car with the same easy stride I remembered from the boy who used to drive us to the quarry on summer nights. He tapped on my window gently, smiling. I rolled it down, my breath catching. "Hello, Evelyn," he said softly. I wanted to apologize for everything. For the smoke smell on my clothes, for the wrinkles, for calling him after half a century. Instead, I just whispered, "Hi." He studied me, really studied me, the way no one had in years. And then he said 3 words that shattered the dam holding back my tears. "You look beautiful." The sobs came fast, raw and unfiltered. Right there in that parking lot, I broke down. 50 years of held-back tears, 3 nights of sleeping in a car, a lifetime of feeling invisible. Robert didn't flinch. He opened my car door, helped me out, and wrapped me in his arms. His sweater smelled of clean laundry and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the ash still clinging to me. I buried my face against him, weeping, and he held me as though I was something precious. When the tears slowed, Robert guided me to his car. He loaded my pitiful belongings, the bags, the scorched toolbox, into the trunk with care, as though they were treasures. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small. "Home," he said simply. The drive wound through neighborhoods I had never seen, increasingly grand, until we passed through iron gates marked with his name. Morrison. His house came into view, a sprawling estate of stone and timber, elegant but not gaudy. A place built to last. My breath caught. "Robert, this is incredible." He looked at it with a strange expression. "Too big. Always has been. I built it hoping to fill it someday. But," he shrugged, "some dreams don't work out. Never married?" The question slipped out. Came close. But something was always missing. He glanced at me. "What you?" The words lodged in my chest, unspoken for decades, but now alive. The interior was breathtaking. Hardwood floors glowing like honey, ceilings high and open, rooms filled with books and photographs. It was not a cold mansion, but a home infused with warmth. "Are you hungry?" Robert asked, leading me to a kitchen larger than my old living room. "I was about to cook before you called." "You cook?" I asked, surprised. He smiled. "Living alone teaches you a few things." He grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, moving with practiced ease. I sat at the counter, overwhelmed by the normalcy of it. Over dinner, I told him everything. Harold's steady love, Daniel's distance, the fire, the rejection. My voice trembled, but Robert never interrupted. His eyes never left mine. When I finished, he reached across the table, taking my hand. "Evelyn, I'm sorry for what you've lost, but I'm not sorry you called me. I never stopped loving you, not once in 50 years. I stared at him, my heart thundering. "I'm not the girl you remember." "No," he said, his grip steady. "You're better. You've lived, loved, endured. That girl was potential. You're the woman she became, and I want to know her." Robert gave me an entire guest wing, bedroom, sitting room, even a soaking tub. It felt like a luxury hotel. At first, I tiptoed around, afraid to leave too much of myself scattered in his pristine world. But slowly I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came 3 days a week. On the others, I found myself cooking for him. Simple meals, nothing fancy. But Robert ate every bite with gratitude, declaring each dish perfect. When he said that word, I almost laughed. Me, 68, gray roots showing, hands spotted with age. Perfect. But in his eyes I saw it. Not perfection of youth, but of being wanted, seen, valued. Our days fell into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks through his gardens, evenings by the fire, sharing stories of the 50 years we had missed. He told me of his business empire, Morrison Development, building shopping centers and office complexes across the states. He told me about women he had dated, brilliant, beautiful, but never right. I even proposed once, he admitted one rainy evening. Christmas Eve 5 years ago. Restaurant, diamond ring, the whole show. She said yes, but the night before the wedding I called it off. "Why?" I whispered. He looked into the fire, then at me. Because I was still in love with someone I met 50 years ago. The words stunned me. My breath hitched. "Robert, crazy, isn't it?" he said with a rueful smile. "But so is keeping a business card for half a century." We laughed softly, but tears pricked my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt alive. 3 weeks into this fragile new happiness, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I froze. "Mom," he said, his tone clipped. "Where are you? Mrs. Bradley said you moved out of the shelter weeks ago." "I'm staying with a friend." "What friend?" "Mom, you don't have rich friends." His voice dripped suspicion. "You'd be surprised," I replied coolly. Silence stretched, then, "Claire and I talked. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, until you figure things out." The offer that would have saved me weeks ago now felt hollow. "What changed your mind?" "We realized family should stick together," he said carefully. But I heard it. The curiosity, the calculation. Someone must have told him I wasn't struggling anymore. "That's kind," I said. "But I'm happy where I am." "You can't just move in with some stranger. What do you even know about this man?" I smiled sadly. "I know he's never made me feel like a burden. That's more than I can say for you." After I hung up on Daniel, my hands trembled. Not from guilt, but from release. For the first time in my life, I had said what needed to be said. Robert found me by the window a few minutes later, staring out at the gardens without really seeing them. "Everything all right?" he asked, sliding his arms around me. I leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the chill of my son's words. Daniel called. "He wants to meet you." Robert chuckled softly, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Good. I've been looking forward to meeting him." I turned in his embrace, searching his face. "You're not worried about what he'll think? About what he'll say?" Robert's eyes held steady confidence. "Evelyn, I've been waiting 50 years for you to walk back into my life. I'm not going to let anyone, your son included, make you doubt that you belong here." And in that moment, I believed him. 2 Sundays later, Daniel and Claire arrived for dinner. My stomach twisted with nerves as I watched Robert greet them at the door. He was gracious, polite, and strong, the very picture of the man he had become. "Robert Morrison," he introduced himself, extending a firm handshake. "Daniel Parker," my son replied, his smile polite but tight. His eyes flicked over Robert's tailored suit, the elegant foyer, the art-lined walls. Calculation already flickered there, as though he were assessing stock options rather than meeting the man who now held his mother's heart. Claire, of course, was all charm. She presented a bottle of wine wrapped in silver foil, her voice sugary sweet. "Evelyn, you look wonderful." "And what a beautiful home, Robert." I saw through it. Every word polished, every gesture rehearsed. We sat down to Maria's dinner, a spread of roasted chicken, fresh bread, and garden vegetables. Conversation began stiffly, but Robert carried it with ease, asking Daniel about his work in insurance, nodding at Claire's endless chatter about her marketing firm. I sat in silence, my heart heavy. These were my family members, yet I felt more like a guest than I ever had with Robert. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back, swirling his wine. "So, Robert, Mom mentioned you're in development. That must be interesting work." Robert smiled, but his eyes sharpened. "It has its moments." "I work with commercial properties myself," Daniel continued. "Maybe we should talk sometime about potential synergies." Synergies. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Perhaps," Robert replied mildly, then changed the subject to gardening. But Daniel wasn't deterred. I clenched my fork, fighting the urge to speak. My son wasn't interested in my happiness. He was interested in Robert's wealth. Weeks passed, and Daniel's calls became frequent, more frequent than they had been in years. He asked about my health, my activities, and even my cooking. But inevitably, the conversation circled back to Robert's business. Investments, assets, plans. The worst was when Claire began sending gifts. Expensive candles, gourmet chocolates, a silk scarf, each note signed with warm regards, dripping with false affection. "She's trying to buy her way back into your good graces," Robert observed one evening as I unwrapped a cashmere throw. "I know," I said quietly, "but the question is, what does she think she's buying?" We found out 3 months later. Daniel called while Robert was out at a business dinner. His voice was forced casual but tight. "Mom, I need to ask you something. I hope you won't be offended." My stomach nodded. "What is it?" "Have you and Robert discussed what happens to his assets? In the future?" There it was. The truth laid bare. I closed my eyes, grief washing over me. "Daniel, that's an incredibly inappropriate question." "I'm just worried about you," he insisted. "You're older now. If something happens to him, I don't want you to be taken advantage of." The audacity stole my breath. The same son who turned me away when I was homeless now pretends to care about my financial security. "My situation is none of your business," I said coldly. "Of course it is. You're my mother." "No," I whispered. "When I needed you most, you and Claire turned me away. Remember? You decided I was too much trouble, too disruptive to your perfect little life. Don't pretend to care now." He tried to protest, but I ended the call before my tears could choke me. Robert returned that night to find me sitting in our bedroom, tears streaking my face. He immediately crossed the room and gathered me into his arms. "What happened?" "Daniel," I whispered. "He asked about your assets, about what happens when you're gone." Robert's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his storm-gray eyes, but his voice was calm. "Evelyn, listen to me. You raised your son with love. You did your best. But the choices he makes as a man are his. They reflect on him, not you. I keep thinking I failed him somehow," I confessed. "That if I'd been a better mother, he'd be a better man." Robert cupped my face gently. "You did not fail. You gave him everything. His selfishness is not your burden to carry." And for the first time, I began to believe it. 2 weeks later, Robert invited Daniel and Claire to dinner again. He didn't tell me until that morning. "We need to clear the air," he said firmly. My nerves rattled all day, but when the evening came, Robert was steady as stone. After dinner, he led us into the living room. "I want to talk about Evelyn," he began, his tone polite but unyielding, "and about certain expectations that seem to have developed." Daniel shifted in his seat. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do," Robert replied, his voice pleasant but edged with steel. "You've been very interested in my business, my investments, my future. Meanwhile, your mother has noticed your attention has changed since she came here." Claire opened her mouth, but Robert raised a hand. "I'm not finished. Evelyn doesn't need your approval for our relationship, or your permission to be happy. What she needs is unconditional love, the same love she's given you your entire life. And frankly, she hasn't received it." Daniel flushed red, his fists clenching. "I love my mother. do you?" Robert's voice remained calm. "Because from where I sit, you love the idea of what she might inherit. That isn't love. That's opportunism." The silence that followed was thick, choking. Claire looked at her lap, pale. Daniel glared, but Robert didn't flinch. "You need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your mother," Robert finished. "If it's real, if it's genuine, you're welcome here anytime. If it's about money, then it ends here." I sat frozen, tears in my eyes. Never in my life had anyone defended me so fiercely. When Daniel and Claire left that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. 6 months after that first call in the parking lot, Robert asked me to marry him. He didn't kneel, didn't make a spectacle. We were sitting on the porch at sunset, sipping coffee, when he simply said, "Evelyn, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Yes." The ceremony was simple, just Robert, me, his oldest friend Thomas, and Maria, the housekeeper, as witnesses. I wore a soft blue dress, he a charcoal suit. No fanfare, no performance. Just us, pledging to make the most of whatever years remained. Daniel came alone. He shook Robert's hand, forced a smile, and left quickly after the vows. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. And for me, it was enough. "I work with commercial properties myself," Daniel continued. "Maybe we should talk sometime about potential synergies." Synergies. The word hung in the air like smoke. "Perhaps," Robert replied mildly, then changed the subject to gardening. But Daniel wasn't deterred. I clenched my fork, fighting the urge to speak. My son wasn't interested in my happiness. He was interested in Robert's wealth. Weeks passed, and Daniel's calls became frequent, more frequent than they had been in years. He asked about my health, my activities, and even my cooking. But inevitably, the conversation circled back to Robert's business. Investments, assets, plans. The worst was when Claire began sending gifts. Expensive candles, gourmet chocolates, a silk scarf. Each note signed with warm regards, dripping with false affection. "She's trying to buy her way back into your good graces," Robert observed one evening as I unwrapped a cashmere throw. "I know," I said quietly. "But the question is, what does she think she's buying?" We found out 3 months later. Daniel called while Robert was out at a business dinner. His voice was forced casual but tight. "Mom, I need to ask you something. I hope you won't be offended." My stomach nodded. "What is it?" "Have you and Robert discussed what happens to his assets? In the future?" There it was, the truth laid bare. I closed my eyes, grief washing over me. "Daniel, that's an incredibly inappropriate question." "I'm just worried about you," he insisted. "You're older now. If something happens to him, I don't want you to be taken advantage of." The audacity stole my breath. The same son who turned me away when I was homeless now pretends to care about my financial security. "My situation is none of your business," I said coldly. "Of course it is. You're my mother." "No," I whispered. "When I needed you most, you and Claire turned me away. Remember? You decided I was too much trouble, too disruptive to your perfect little life. Don't pretend to care now." He tried to protest, but I ended the call before my tears could choke me. Robert returned that night to find me sitting in our bedroom, tears streaking my face. He immediately crossed the room and gathered me into his arms. "What happened?" "Daniel," I whispered. "He asked about your assets, about what happens when you're gone." Robert's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his storm-gray eyes, but his voice was calm. "Evelyn, listen to me. You raised your son with love. You did your best. But the choices he makes as a man are his. They reflect on him, not you. I keep thinking I failed him somehow," I confessed. "That if I'd been a better mother, he'd be a better man." Robert cupped my face gently. "You did not fail. You gave him everything. His selfishness is not your burden to carry." And for the first time, I began to believe it. 2 weeks later, Robert invited Daniel and Claire to dinner again. He didn't tell me until that morning. "We need to clear the air," he said firmly. My nerves rattled all day, but when the evening came, Robert was steady as stone. After dinner, he led us into the living room. "I want to talk about Evelyn," he began, his tone polite but unyielding, "and about certain expectations that seem to have developed." Daniel shifted in his seat. "I'm not sure what you mean." I think you do, Robert replied, his voice pleasant but edged with steel. You've been very interested in my business, my investments, my future. Meanwhile, your mother has noticed your attention has changed since she came here. Claire opened her mouth, but Robert raised a hand. I'm not finished. Evelyn doesn't need your approval for our relationship, or your permission to be happy. What she needs is unconditional love, the same love she's given you your entire life. And frankly, she hasn't received it. Daniel flushed red, his fists clenching. I love my mother. Do you? Robert's voice remained calm. Because from where I sit, you love the idea of what she might inherit. That isn't love. That's opportunism. The silence that followed was thick, choking. Claire looked at her lap, pale. Daniel glared, but Robert didn't flinch. You need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your mother, Robert finished. If it's real, if it's genuine, you're welcome here anytime. If it's about money, then it ends here. I sat frozen, tears in my eyes. Never in my life had anyone defended me so fiercely. When Daniel and Claire left that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. 6 months after that first call in the parking lot, Robert asked me to marry him. He didn't kneel, didn't make a spectacle. We were sitting on the porch at sunset sipping coffee when he simply said, Evelyn, will you spend the rest of your life with me? Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, yes. The ceremony was simple, just Robert, me, his oldest friend Thomas, and Maria, the housekeeper, as witnesses. I wore a soft blue dress, he a charcoal suit. No fanfare, no performance, just us, pledging to make the most of whatever years remained. Daniel came alone. He shook Robert's hand, forced a smile, and left quickly after the vows. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something, and for me it was enough. Now at 69, I wake each morning in Robert's arms. Sunlight filters through the windows, coffee brews in the kitchen, and I feel something I thought I'd lost forever. Peace. Not because of his wealth, not because of his grand house, but because for the first time in years, I am seen. I am loved, not as someone's burden, not as someone's obligation, but as myself. The fire destroyed my old life, but perhaps it also cleared the ground for something new. Sometimes destruction is only another name for renewal. Living with Robert after our wedding felt both surreal and familiar. The house that had once seemed too vast, too elegant for me, slowly softened into a home. He insisted I take the guest wing when I first arrived, but now we shared everything. His study, the kitchen, even his favorite armchair by the fireplace. At first I moved cautiously, still half expecting to wake up and find the dream gone. But Robert was patient, grounding me with small acts of kindness. Each morning, he brewed the coffee before I even stirred. Each evening, he asked about my day as though nothing mattered more than my answer. I've been alone for so long, I admitted one night as we walked through his gardens. The roses he had planted bloomed in neat rows, reminding me of the garden I had lost. I forgot what it felt like to be part of someone's daily life. Robert slipped his hand into mine. You were never meant to live forgotten, Evelyn. You deserve to be cherished. His words, so simple and certain, healed wounds that had lingered for years. Marcus's behavior, let's keep it Daniel for continuity, didn't transform overnight. At first, his calls continued to circle Robert's wealth, though he tried to mask it in casual questions. But Robert's stern conversation that night had left an impression. Slowly, Daniel's tone shifted. He began asking about my health instead of Robert's business, about the garden I had started with Robert's help, and about the book club Maria had encouraged me to join. It wasn't perfect. The wounds of rejection still lingered. But for the first time, our conversations weren't laced with calculation. One afternoon, he even showed up unannounced. Robert was at a meeting, and Daniel walked me through the greenhouse Robert had built for his orchids. He listened as I explained how Robert had taught me to care for them, nodding quietly. You sound happy, Mom, he said at last. I am. The words surprised me as much as they did him. Claire, however, faded into the background. The expensive gifts stopped arriving. The syrupy messages ceased. Whether by choice or design, she was no longer part of my son's attempts at reconciliation. Part of me was relieved. Another part mourned the relationship that never was, but I had made peace with it. Some people are not meant to remain in our lives, no matter how much we try to fit them into it. Robert and I fell into a rhythm that felt astonishingly natural. Mornings began on the porch, coffee cups warming our hands as the sun rose over the hills. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we sat in companionable silence, listening to the birds. Afternoons often found us walking the grounds, Robert showing me the trees he had planted decades ago, each one tied to a memory. "This oak," he said once, patting its trunk, "was planted the year I opened my first office. It kept me grounded when I felt like the world was moving too fast. Evenings were our favorite. We'd cook together, my pot roast, his grilled salmon, and eat by the fire. We told each other stories of the years we'd missed, the loves, the losses, the choices that had shaped us. "I always thought I'd see you again," he confessed one night, his voice low. "Every business deal, every success, I told myself I was building a life worthy of you. Even if you never came back." Tears filled my eyes. "And I carried your card all these years, Robert. I told myself it was silly, sentimental, but I couldn't let it go." He reached across the table, taking my hand. "Some promises don't expire, Evelyn. They just wait." In Robert's world, I rediscovered myself. Not as Daniel's mother, not as Harold's widow, but as Evelyn, a woman with her own desires, her own worth. He encouraged me to join a local charity group. At first I resisted, embarrassed by my age and my lack of polished clothes. But Robert insisted. "Evelyn, you have more to give than you realize. You've survived things most people couldn't. That's strength, not weakness." And so I volunteered at the animal shelter, walking dogs, comforting abandoned cats. The staff welcomed me with open arms, and soon I found myself smiling again, genuinely, not out of politeness. One evening, Robert returned home to find me humming while I prepared dinner. He paused in the doorway, watching. "You're glowing," he said. I laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just making soup." "No," he replied softly. "You're happy. And that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." One afternoon, Robert called me into his study. On his desk sat a small frame. Inside, mounted carefully, was the faded business card I had carried for 50 years. "You kept this all that time," he said. "Now I'll keep it for both of us." I traced the glass with trembling fingers, my heart swelling. That card had once symbolized regret. Now it symbolized fulfillment. 8 months after our wedding, Daniel visited again. This time his tone was different. Genuine, almost humble. He asked about the garden, about the shelter where I volunteered. As we sat in Robert's living room, Daniel finally said, "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for turning you away, for letting Claire speak for me." Tears welled in my eyes. I had waited years for those words. "I forgive you," I whispered. And I meant it. Robert squeezed my hand, silent support radiating from him. This morning I woke in Robert's arms, sunlight streaming through our window. I looked at the man beside me, the boy I once loved, the man I had found again after 50 years, and realized something. The fire hadn't ended me. It had renewed me. Sometimes destruction clears the ground for what we were always meant to build. Sometimes loss makes room for the love we were always meant to find. At 69 years old, I am happier than I ever imagined possible. Not because of Robert's money, or his beautiful home, or his success, but because for the first time in decades, I am truly seen, truly loved. The fire took my house, but it gave me back my life. Now I turn to you, the one who has listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever lost everything, only to find something greater waiting on the other side? Share your story. Let's see how far these words can travel. Because sometimes, when everything burns down, love rises from the ashes.